There we go. Now we're ready to go. Thank you, everyone, for joining BritBanglaCovid's fifth public meeting. The first public meeting we had, I think it was in June, July 2020. So I would like to thank you, and I feel privileged really to have organized a number of public meetings primarily focused on minority communities, how COVID-19 has impacted minority communities in Britain primarily. I suppose perhaps for the benefit of new joiners, you might find it helpful to get an intro of BritBanglaCovid so you can understand where it is coming from. It was formed during the first lockdown once it was announced in March 2020. Initially, the purpose of BritBanglaCovid was to keep a record of British Bangladeshi stories during the initial lockdown. Of course, gradually it kind of became something else. So it moved away from telling stories to raising public awareness and raising public awareness campaign by building bridges with organizations, campaign groups, human rights groups, as well as communities who are affected by it to make sure, firstly, individuals share their experiences as to why we need to comply with government guidelines, as well as for the benefit of wider public interest to capture one of the most important historical moment, I think, globally, as well as nationally speaking. So now, currently, we've covered a number of topics really, both in terms of healthcare and social care. We've also covered poverty and unemployment under COVID. The previous one, the last one we've organized, it focuses on vaccination and COVID. And of course, one of the controversial topics that many people may come across is really around migrants and refugees during lockdown and during the pandemic. And ultimately, BritBanglaCovid is really for both educational and public awareness focused, and please do bear in mind that everyone not necessarily knows the subject around migration or refugees, so try to make it as simple as possible, because different people are at a different stage of learning and knowing, so be mindful of that. So yes, current topic, it is around migrant and refugees, and I'm privileged to say that we've got fantastic speakers who are specialists in their field. We've got Pierre McCullough from Bail for Immigration Detainees, who'll be talking about a broader brush to immigration and detention and migrants. We've got Ummul Chowdhury talking from Frontline Aid, who has an EU perspective. And of course, we've got Aliyah Ulay from Patients Not Passport, Antonia Bright from Move for Justice, and finally Moslik Uddin from UK Career Connect. I do want to kind of give my condolences to James Bullman, who is unable to attend because one of his family members just passed away recently due to COVID. So obviously condolences to him and his family. So enough of me, and I would like to hear from you, the experts. So PA, please feel to educate us around what's happening in the context of migrants and refugees in Britain.
Okay, how long would you want me to speak for? You just
about
want me to
7 minutes would be fantastic. Okay,
so I'll just give a general overview for a discussion, which is because of COVID-19, of course, there would have been very few flights, and therefore a lot of people who had permission to be in the UK were, by necessity, had to apply for extensions, and provisions were made for that. Our organisation hasn't been involved in that work, but I'm just saying that to be aware. And of course, there's been an accompanying problem for those who expected to be here for a limited time, and who had the funds to be here for only a limited time, and they found themselves trapped in the UK. And there's been a lot of discussion and argument about whether or not they should have been entitled to apply for some benefits whilst they're unable to leave the UK. My organisation applies for people to get out of detention. That's basically what we do. And we also do a lot of work on deportation cases. And that's focusing on people who've completed criminal convictions. So I'm going to give a bit of a picture of what's happening in the context of immigration detention and deportations. And then I think that that'll probably be enough for me for the moment. I'll hand back to Ripon, which is for detention. There was a huge change at the start. They started releasing a lot of people. If you imagine in about March of 2020, there were in IRCs about 360 people in detention. The year before, equivalent period, there were about 1,700 people. What did not change and has not changed is the number of people who complete their criminal sentences and are then kept in prison. That figure never went down. What was extraordinary for us is that we normally have an positive outcome on bail applications of about 56 to 59%. And that compares to a national average of about 30%, which we put down to a lot down to the fact that we were able to give more time to a lot of our cases. We're not hamstrung by legal aid. But during the pandemic, our success rate in bail went up to 94%. We were winning virtually every single case that we were taking. And that huge success rate led us to conduct a review of the cases. Why was the Home Office refusing to release people and insisting on detaining so many people, especially in prisons, cases that we were taking out, and then the courts were releasing them. And we found that in a huge majority of cases, I think out of 42 at that point, we'd done 42 applications, about 7 of them had evidence that they were a high risk of reoffending or of harm. Everyone else that the Home Office made such a claim about was a lower risk when you went down into the evidence, or there just wasn't evidence to support the assertions at all. And so the courts became very skeptical of the Home Office position. And it got to the point that the Home Office wrote to the president of the first tier tribunal to complain about judges releasing people. And the president replied, telling him to go away, telling the Home Office to go away and to stop interfering, and pointing out to the Home Office that they actually need to sort themselves out, to be honest. But it's an extraordinary attempt by the executive, by the Home Office, to try and to change the approach of an independent judiciary in the UK. Since then, and also actually, sorry, not since then, so also at the start, a number of NGOs came together and we started work in trying to get more people out of detention. In fact, trying to get IRCs closed down. One organisation went straight in and took the government to court. That was Detention Action. And unfortunately, their application was rejected, mainly because the court found that the Home Office were taking adequate steps at trying to introduce procedures to protect people in detention from COVID-19. These policies that the Home Office introduced were eventually disclosed. We carried on engaging in correspondence with the Home Office, but unfortunately that case has led the Home Office repeatedly to say that the courts think we're fantastic, so go away. More recently, we've engaged with the Home Office again, making a similar call, with over 70 organisations supporting us on the basis that the numbers of COVID-19 who are held under immigration powers has increased. So there have been temporary closures of Brookhouse detention centre. There have been movements of people around the detention estate, and whenever they move people, they have procedures in place where they move you into isolation before they quarantine you, which is how they've tried to get round the demands for releases. The problem they really have is that these quarantine measures don't really apply to detaining officers. And so the detaining officers have tended to get COVID-19 and have been a source of infection, we think, because so many of them, Brookhouse was closed down mainly because something like 30 officers were found to have COVID-19. So the further thing to really note is accompanying all this in the last year or so has been the numbers of people who have come in on dinghies, on boats, applying for asylum. And it's a worrying trend in that they are being detained in military barracks, including barracks that have been designated for demolition. Hence not a surprise that these places are being found to be inhospitable. In fact, with the Yarl's Wood barracks, well, Yarl's Wood camp that was being built, that was burnt down, or partly burnt down recently, they had to be extremely careful because, sorry, it wasn't Yarl's Wood, it was Napier. They had to be extremely careful because of asbestos. And so, I found that, firemen being careful because of asbestos and the smoke indicated that people were being detained in buildings with asbestos, which is extraordinary. I couldn't believe I read that. Anyway, what's been happening with those centres is that they have been, people are told they're living there to live there. They're told they're not detained, but there's a curfew. So they have to be on the premises at a certain time. A breach of the curfew, no doubt, would make them liable to detention proper. But, for an organisation like us, this is a really big issue because bail is a form of detention. Having restrictions on your freedom are forms of detention. Curfews are certainly a form of detention. We know that in Yarl's Wood, people have been told, and elsewhere, people have been told, don't go to the local villages because you're going to get hostility. We know there have been far-right protests outside of the detention centres. And the people who protested at Yarl's Wood, we know that about 14 of them were transferred to Tinsley House. We think that one has been charged with an offence. We've also heard, and this is really, now this is rumour, to be honest, so I haven't got anything from what I'm about to say to support this beyond reports we're receiving, that doors to cells are unlocked in the detention centre and people are being told they're not detained. It suggests to me that people are probably being told you can walk in and out of your cell, but of course this is your place of residence, and if you are not residing in your place of residence, you'll become liable to detention, presumably to your cell being locked. But the reason I'm talking about that is in the context of camps, which are being described as not detention, but as accommodation, and now a detention centre is being described as accommodation and not a detention centre. So it's, to an extent, I think that a lot of what is happening is under the cloak of COVID-19, because we, for example, as an organisation, have not been going to detention centres right from the start. When we said that detention centres needed to be closed, we also stopped our staff from going there because our staff would infect people and would become infected. So direct contact with people in detention centres, places people in detention centres at risk. You know, unfortunately, we might be service providers of advice services, but still engaging with people in detention centre endangers them in this situation. That's the position we took, and it also strengthens our demands, I think, that the detention centres should be closed now and people released. But I think that gives you an overview of how COVID-19 has had an impact upon us, but also seems to be being used, advantages being taken of COVID-19 to introduce new types of measures, new piloting systems of holding people or accommodating, as the Home Office would argue. Yeah.
Thank you, Pierre. Very clear, definitely for sure. Umol, are you there?
Yes, very good.
Go ahead.
Okay, so thanks, Pierre, for that, and thank you, Ripon, for having me here. Just to give you a bit of background, so I work with refugees for an organisation that I co-founded 10 years ago now, so that's a decade, mostly in the Middle East. And we work with refugees, but also displaced peoples. I think going back to what Ripon was saying about migrants and refugees, and it's important to make the distinction as well that these are different groups under law. So you can have, for example, people who are part of the EU, no longer the Brits, and they are legal, they can legally move around, they have freedom of movement within the EU, so the EU citizens. And they're also migrants. And then you can also have migrants who need a visa, for example, from Bangladesh. So you can come and work in Germany or wherever in the EU, but you need some kind of visa saying what your status is. So those are different types of migrants. And when you look at refugees, they come under I think it was the 1951 UN Convention about what it constitutes to be a refugee. And this convention was taken to domestic law across the EU at that time. So to be a refugee is something different. When you come in, however you arrive, basically it's illegal movement. Then you have to register somewhere. So if you come into Europe, I don't know if you're reading about this, but wherever your first port of call is, you have to register there, and they're the ones who have to process you. I mean, I'm just giving you some background on this, so it's just to think about what it means and contextualize when we think about what it means to be a refugee. So then it's your first port of call. And I think it's interesting now in an age, like previously you could potentially get rejected perhaps in the Netherlands, and then you sort of sneak off across somewhere and you end up in Britain, and then you re-register, who's to know. But now with, I think this is fascinating, now we have different types of data that we can collect, biometric data, fingerprints. So I think there's a different pressure, I think, on refugees if we think about that kind of movement. I'm actually based in Germany at the moment. And the reason being, we set up an office in Germany. And I did consider setting up in the UK. But if we again think about the concept of what it means to be a refugee, it's always national law. And in terms of where the majority of my work is in Muslim countries in the Middle East. And the environment, the political environment around how we send money or support conflict zones is very difficult in the UK. So I'll just move to kind of think about the sanctions regime as well. So if you think about refugees coming in, there's a lot of money flows going to different places. That can come from refugees themselves or from governments. And there's subcontractors, such as like UN organizations, Save the Children. So one of the reasons we set up in Germany, we were hoping it would be a better or easier place to be so that we could support in sending funds to conflict zones. That's a different conversation and about how that worked out or not. In terms of what we're also seeing in terms of the COVID pandemic is that if you think about most vulnerable communities, they will tend to be low-skilled workers. So the communities that have come into Syria, for example, they will, Germany. Can you hear me okay? Is that fine? Yeah, okay. So if you think about people who have perhaps done from Greece or somewhere, they've come into Germany. They are now, many of them are on hold in terms of their lives. So if we think again about that journey, you're on hold in terms of your lives, you're going to be in a holding center. In Germany, you're required to learn German to a certain level before you're able to work. And that can put you, so if you're somebody who's 18 years old, 22 years old, you could be learning full-time German for a number of years. And the only way you could work is cash in hand, or you're not legally allowed to work. In terms of housing, you are allowed to rent and have housing which is subsidized by the state. The reality is many young men will find it extremely difficult to rent in the open market because landlords will not rent to you. So, and also in terms of the other consideration is if you are a vulnerable group, with COVID-19, it's in many ways much easier to traffic people. So you're being trafficked for employment, or you're being trafficked for exploitation. So I think, yeah, you should also remark on this, a lot of exploitation of refugee communities for different types of exploitation. We don't have to go, we can ask about that, but we're seeing that also happening a lot. And in terms of protections, we need developed countries or the UN or some kind of international body to provide those protections for vulnerable groups. Where that willingness is not there, you know, it's highly unlikely that they can have those protections, because you can have the law and you can have, but you need a body to also implement that law. To go on the other side of that, so my work is, a lot of it is in Syria and conflict areas. And we're also finding that a lot of the communities that have left, they're supporting communities back home, wherever that home may be. But for example, if you try to send money to Iraq or Syria or Iran or Yemen at this time, they're under sanctions. So realistically, it's very difficult to send in any financing, even if you are a major UN body or a Save the Children. Also, the way that contracts will work, and I say contracts because the international humanitarian system is very much an industry, and there's billions going from governments. And if you think you're a Western government up here, because it is hierarchical, how does that money flow down to people on the ground in areas of conflict? And this is a big issue, because if you have an area of conflict, you don't want to have a massive refugee outflux. So a lot of this money, what's happening to it is that it doesn't get to where it's going. And I think the statistic is around, in 2017, somebody did a study on it, it's around under 2% of the money that we give will actually make it locally into an area of conflict. So the Bangladeshi Rohingya crisis, Syrian crisis, Yemen, under 2% will make it to local organizations. And obviously there's massive disempowerment, but also it has an impact on how can you make decisions for local communities about how to deal with the problems in their communities, be it conflict or COVID, if they don't have access to funds, because those decisions are being made at a different level. So that's also a question that we can perhaps think about in terms of, like, why is it that, you know, how can, in a way, you don't want massive outfluxes of people moving across borders. And at this time, you know, we're going to see more problems internationally because of COVID and in economic migration as well. And how can we make sure funds get to where they're supposed to be and give protections in people's homes where they want to normally remain, because it's secure, if it can be secure, rather than move to countries like Germany. And I think finally what I want to, because I've sort of given you a view about what it could be, the migration question, what it could look like if you are moving across borders and the vulnerability of people in moving across borders. And finally, if you do arrive somewhere, for example, like Germany, there is a huge expectation that your life will be a certain way, but normally there is a lot of prejudice, even within the right that you're supposed to have access to work. And we also find that a lot of the outbreaks, if you think about how refugees are being housed or homed or held in different spaces, you're more likely to get outbreaks because there won't be the physical space for people, even in Europe, to be spaced apart and be able to isolate. So there are those questions as well. And there were a number of outbreaks in refugee centers in Germany over the last year. and it was sort of highlighted that these spaces just weren't appropriate. And I think just in terms of one last thing is, I work in the humanitarian space. There's no such thing under law. Like, there's no, the humanitarian space doesn't mean you have certain rights under law. It's international conventions, refugee conventions. There's no humanitarian law as such. So we work with what's going on, but there's no essential protection to be a humanitarian. And I think that's also something that's kind of interesting to think about. Ripon, do you have any questions for me? Because I have a mass of information on this.
That's
space.
fine. What we could do, because what will happen is we'll go through all the speakers, and then there'll be Q&A anyway, and then we'll talk about practicalities. So thank you, by the way. So you covered a lot already. Yeah, thank you. Absolutely, we'll come back anyway. Fine. Yeah. Okay. So Aliyah, because I know you have kind of more around experience around health. So please do tell a bit more about your expertise. Which way are you coming from?
Definitely. Thanks, Ripon, and thanks everyone for being here, for having me. My name's Alia. I work at Migrants Organise. We're a grassroots platform where migrants connect, build common ground, and organise for dignity and justice for all. And we particularly organise with our migrant communities to end the hostile environment, which I'm going to give a kind of a little bit of a background about first, kind of zooming out, going pre-COVID, if we can remember such time. And then I'm going to talk particularly about how the hostile environment has affected the NHS, and brought immigration controls into the NHS, and then how that's having an impact on migrant communities in this time when access to healthcare is obviously very important. So as Ripon said, I work on the Patients Not Passports campaign, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. I think hopefully maybe at the end of the session when we talk about practicalities and how people can get involved and what we can do. But I want to kind of first go back to thinking about the hostile environment, which was a term sort of first used by Theresa May under the then Conservative government, where they brought in essentially extremely punitive immigration controls into every aspect of everyday life. And the idea of the hostile environment is to make life in the UK as unbearable as possible. This is sort of its almost explicit aim, particularly for undocumented migrants, so that they sort of have to leave, or maybe that they might think twice about coming to the UK. We're not sure exactly how they thought it would work. But the idea is to sort of, by blocking access to public services and pushing people into extreme poverty. But as we know from things like the Windrush scandal, these policies affect people, not just undocumented migrants, people without status or people, in the legal system, but actually anyone sort of racialized as a migrant who might be questioned about their entitlement to public services. So under the hostile environment, employers, landlords, NHS staff, and other public service servants have to check your status, your immigration status, before they offer you a job or housing or healthcare or any other support. And you can be refused healthcare, you can be refused a house to rent if you don't have the right immigration status. And sort of what underpins this whole thing is a set of sort of secret, not so secret, data sharing deals between different government departments and the Home Office, which allows immigration enforcement access to confidential information provided, for example, by patients when you go to hospital, or by school children. And although that's kind of ended up thanks to a really wonderful campaign, and that information can be used for the purposes of immigration enforcement. The hostile environment was kind of coupled with an expansion of the detention estate that Piers kind of already touched on. And as we know, migrants often get scapegoated at a time of economic downturn, which was what was happening at this time following the 2008 economic crash, resulting in much, much harsher, sort of stricter, more punitive policies, including restriction of access from migrants to things like legal services, restrictions on, this was slightly earlier, on their right to work, which Amal also mentioned, that happens in Germany. It happens in the UK too. Asylum seekers are not denied the right to work, and if you're undocumented, you can't work. So forcing people into really exploitative conditions. Restrictions on access to benefits and other state support. So often people have this thing called no recourse to public funds attached to their visa, which has meant that during COVID, a lot of the support that the government has provided, many migrants don't have access to. And this is also sits alongside the Home Office outsourcing their functions to completely unaccountable private companies who are making profits of millions by providing people with totally inadequate, unsanitary and unsafe housing, food, and so on. So it's not great. I'm going to talk particularly about the NHS because it's something that I work on with the Patients Not Passports campaign. And so what happened was with the hostile environment being introduced into the NHS, it changed how it worked so that if you did not have a particular form of leave to remain, you are considered, for the purposes of healthcare, an overseas visitor who needs to be charged for their healthcare. This particularly affects secondary care. It doesn't affect primary care, so GP surgeries and so on. But there were sort of four main things I'm going to talk about that kind of changed. The first thing was the introduction of the immigration health surcharge, which was in the news a lot during last year. It's steadily increased since it was introduced. It's now up to £624 per person per year, and you have to pay it in its entirety up front with the cost of your visa. So if you're a family of 3, for example, and you're applying for a 2.5-year visa, I was going to try and do the maths quickly, but I could not do that. I did it before this. It's about £5,000 that you have to pay in a lump sum at the time that you're applying for your visa. And many people just they simply cannot afford that. And so it traps people out of being able to renew their visas or regularize their status. It includes thousands of healthcare workers in the UK, which the government promised that they would scrap it. They'd scrap it for healthcare workers, and they have yet to do so. And actually, that cost is just increasing. We don't focus so much on the immigration health surcharge in the Patients Not Passports campaign, although it's an incredibly unjust, unfair, racist double tax that is placed on migrants. The kind of 3 main things we do focus on are, firstly, this charging for migrants up to 150% of the cost for their NHS care in secondary care. So that's sort of anything after you've been admitted through A&E, any kind of specialist treatment that you receive. And kind of the big change that happened was it included upfront charging. Upfront charging means that if your care is deemed not necessary, not immediately necessary and not urgent, you have to pay before you get the treatment. And that's often thousands and thousands of pounds that you're expected to pay, and many people simply don't have that, and it means that they are just simply excluded, denied that healthcare outright. Charging also means that people will be in hospital and they'll then later receive bills of thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds that they can't pay. The second thing is checking entitlement to care. So as I mentioned earlier, the hostile environment sort of underpinning all this system is you having to prove your status, that you're entitled to access services. So it means that often if you go to hospital, you'll get asked, have you lived here for 6 months? Can you prove it? We need proof of address for that amount of time. We need you to show us some ID, a passport, and so on, which obviously many people can't do. And that's in the Windrush scandal why so many people were excluded from care. The final thing is this data sharing that goes on between the Home Office and the NHS. And so if you have a bill to the NHS that you haven't paid of over £500 for longer than 3 months, the hospital will tell the Home Office, and that can affect any future application that you make, visa application that you make, and the Home Office can use it as a primary reason to outright deny your visa. And so what we're seeing as a result of these inhumane policies, and this is pre-COVID, right, is people being deterred from seeking the care that they need because they fear getting debt, they fear being reported to the Home Office, they fear their families, by extension, being discovered by the Home Office. People are outright denied treatment on the basis of the documents they have. People are questioned about their entitlement to care because of how they look, the colour of their skin, or their so-called foreign-sounding names. And this is something we actually heard people inside hospitals saying that they were going through patient lists, finding the foreign-sounding names, and then asking those people if they could prove their entitlement to care. And people are forced to choose between incurring these huge debts, regularising their immigration status, or their good health. And so that's why in the Patients Not Passports campaign, we say that this is why everybody who is being recruited to being a border guard, every person in the NHS, every doctor, every teacher, and so on, we must now recruit to our campaign to be fighters for justice, for equality, and to stand up for everyone's right to healthcare, to safely be able to access public services. And I hope you'll get involved, and I'll share some more stuff about how you can get involved in a minute. But very, very briefly, because I don't want to talk for too long, what about in the time of COVID? We did some research early on in the pandemic, and we found, firstly, that migrants are not coming forward for healthcare because of the hostile environment. I mean, this is something that we knew pre-COVID, but we have found that also true even in the middle of the pandemic when people were very, very ill. There was a story of a man named Elvis who really sadly, he died at home alone with very serious symptoms of coronavirus, having been too fearful to seek any NHS care because he was undocumented, and so was his wife. And I think he had worked as a cleaner for an NHS hospital at some point, right? And this is the kind of situation that many, many people are finding themselves in. We also found that, so there is an exemption for coronavirus and for actually lots of other infectious diseases from charging. But that exemption, we found, is not reaching the communities who need to hear it. People do not know that they will not be charged for treatment for coronavirus or for the vaccine or for testing and trace. And we also found that people were still being asked to prove their entitlement, even for coronavirus treatment, even though the government had said that wouldn't happen. There was an instance, a story, we spoke to the daughter of a Black British guy who had, whilst he was in a coma, he was sent a letter asking him to prove his entitlement to NHS care, and saying that he had 6 weeks to do so, otherwise he would start getting charged. You know, this sits alongside, and we found, and many others have found, that there are a huge range of additional barriers that have increased during the pandemic that stop migrants from being able to access care. So including language barriers and digital exclusions. Many of the communities we work with don't have access to, you know, digital appointments and to those kind of systems. A lot of the stuff that's moved online isn't translated into other languages. You know, the government's own coronavirus advice wasn't translated for months. And actually it fell to charities and NGOs to do that translating, to reach out to communities, to let people know what their kind of rights were and what they were expected to do during the pandemic, until the government actually started doing something. I do want to talk more about the Patients and Passports campaign, but I think maybe I'll leave that for now and we'll come back to that at the end, Ripon, if that's okay.
Alia, thank you. I mean, you gave us a lot already. Thank you very much, by the way. So I'm sure there'll be questions and answers later. So Antonia, are you there?
I'm never quite ready with my cursor hovering over the microphone. Hi, thanks, Ripon. Yeah, so I am part of the Movement for Justice, and it has been a really strange year, this last year. And it's changed a lot of ways of working, as everyone, I'm sure, has felt the same. But I wanted to start with the background, though, because the background hasn't shifted at all. We're in politically tumultuous times, but the anti-immigrant racism is heightened. The use of racism and scapegoating of immigrants is a fundamental policy that, though it may manifest in hundreds of different ways, it may manifest in lots of different mechanisms and forms of control. Underneath, we are dealing with the same political scapegoating of immigrants and a fundamental racism in Britain. And in that sense, when you kind of realize that, then the things, the way that it comes out may be shocking, but they're also not a surprise, and they shouldn't be a surprise. I would say, to my mind, yes, Brexit is an example as well of a kind of a heightened nationalism that's also driven a lot of, you know, increased racism, and the campaign that ran up to it as well. But the prevalence of scapegoating of immigrants has been central to how I understand this struggle that we're in. I was going to list a few examples of the ways that that's come out, because I mean, first of all, it is a problem that runs before the present government, whether it was the Labour government, the coalition government, and the Conservative government, all have brought forward policies that have scapegoated immigrants and expanded detention and expanded the hostile environment even before Theresa May gave it the name and put the umbrella over it, over the policies, you know, that she was introducing as Home Secretary with the coalition government. But yeah, just in particular, lately, the examples of criminalizing people who were steering a boat, for example, like the recent numbers of people crossing the channel, the numbers of people crossing the channel this last year was up. The numbers of asylum seekers overall was not up, but people have changed the methods of travel because of the situation that we're in for lots of reasons. And people will remember seeing a lot of the kind of headlines and stigma around, people crossing the channel, that instead of seeing, people who are, risking their life for refuge, seeing it as, kind of criminalizing it. And some of the quotes from Priti Patel have been absolutely disgusting. The same with things like the Napier barracks that were mentioned earlier. The fire that occurred, and it's really, the crime is the existence of those barracks and using them, putting people to live there, in a place where if you were there, you'd feel like you've been put there to die. That's the crime. The anyone who has been arrested and charged, because of the fire, the charges need to be dropped immediately, because even before that happened, we've known various people who were in Napier or had been in Napier for a period of time. The conditions are there to drive you to despair, there to drive you to despair. And there's been protests, there have been suicide attempts, there have been, demonstrations, hunger strikes, all kinds of things. And it all falls on deaf ears with the Home Office, with the government. And the fire is probably the biggest thing that actually put a spotlight on Napier Barracks. So, I mean, that was one example of just responding, by criminalizing. There's tons more examples of that. I was also going to just point out just the presumption. I think that the system we find just sets people up to fail. There's a presumption of that of cheating. And I remember some of the accusations of from Priti Patel saying that there was too many do-gooding lawyers and whatnot, like simply because there's people out there trying to tell people what their rights are. And that if you're telling people what their rights are, they might actually be able to fight for those rights. They might be able to do something. And as soon as people were doing something, for example, the Home Office would routinely not ask people questions that might identify that they were victims of trafficking. And if you're not recorded, if there's no official record that you might be a victim of trafficking, meaning, modern slavery, which by and large happened to pretty much anyone who's traveled through Libya, for example, at some point has been seized, kidnapped, forced to work, held to ransom, all sorts of things, that if you're a victim of that, you would be in a category that has to be dealt with differently, that you can't just be thrown back on a plane straight to a country in Europe that you had come to earlier. They couldn't use the Dublin regulations to remove you to another European country. So routinely the Home Office would not ask anything that might identify victims of trafficking. So they'd be setting people up to fail. And simply knowing that talking about what happened to you on your journey mattered to your case, mattered, could prevent you being removed. Knowing that would mean, of course, then that's what you would know to do. And so the Home Office was really taking advantage of being able to remove people simply because people did not know what their rights were. But if they knew, then that they were ready to fight for those rights, ready to fight for the rights that were the whole point of going through this treacherous journey in the first place. I would say that the policies of the Home Office create vulnerability as a matter of policy, which charities then respond to. But refugees are not weak. There's nothing weak about being a refugee. Being a refugee means being strong. There's no other way to describe the Underground Railroad journey that people have had to go through, often taking years, you know, through the most treacherous conditions. There, you know, there's nothing weak about that. That is a fight being made. And, but it's being in a society that is very good at saying one thing, promising one thing, but doing the opposite, that creates the vulnerability and the problems. You think that you're saying you're doing what you need to do, but then at the last minute you discover is this most, can I say, is it a Kafkaesque kind of policy? It just turns everything upside down, and you find that what you needed to do was something else entirely. And Britain is good at deporting people, you know, for reasons that really have nothing to do with anything, setting people up to fail. The recent, like, okay, there was a couple of things in particular that that we'd shifted in Movement for Justice. We'd done different things because we've always campaigned to shut down detention centres, and we just found, you know, early on in the coronavirus that there was a lot of people being, you know, released from Yarlswood, for example. It still took some time. The Home Office was trying to avoid that. I remember, you know, some of the women in Yarlswood, you know, at some point hearing that there was a case of coronavirus, and it was only after hearing the rumor of a case of coronavirus that suddenly the guards would show up at everyone's room giving out masks. And up until that point, they hadn't even had masks. And then, you know, not being told what you're supposed to do with the mask, or how long are you supposed to use it, when do you change it, anything like that. But yeah, they had to release a lot of people from the detention. But then they started using Yarlswood as a short-term holding facility instead. And that has a different set of implications, because the rules governing short-term holding facilities were different than IRCs. And so we then heard, okay, so people are being taken who have crossed the channel. They're not being kept in detention, but they are being put in detention for a few days and then being released to hotels around the country. But for those few days in detention, they're interviewed. They're not identified as victims of trafficking, etc. They're having their phones taken away. They're being given forms and papers, which are all written in English, only in English. And so we found, well, so they are using the detention centres, but in a slightly different way. We were in the in-between lockdowns at that point, like when in September, we did 2 demonstrations at Yarlswood, specifically because we realized, like, none of the, not us and not any of the groups we know are being able to get in touch with the people whilst they're in those few days being in that short-term holding facility. And many are at risk of Dublin removals as well. So, you know, we did those demonstrations because it was the way to make contact, break the isolation. And we held up the numbers, you know, we made a lot of noise. We didn't know anyone that was already in there, but we were able from then to get in touch and for people to get in touch with us. And we were able to very quickly, for example, they'd be given a phone in detention, but they'd have like £1 credit. They'd have no access to legal advice or healthcare. There was just nothing real going on. We were able to start putting some credit on and start like organising and this is, I guess, where I should finish, because I know I've got like very, very short time. I've talked too long. The fight requires breaking down isolation. You know, it's not that there's loads of things that people need, like things, a phone, you know, warm clothes, there's like better food, like there's all kinds of things that people need, and all kinds of ways that they're not provided by the Home Office. And that creates loads of immediate problems that trip you up and are obstacles. But overall, the real question that is needed is the knowledge of how the hell to fight. Like, to understand what the British system is, compare that to the other places people have already been through in Europe, and to know how to fight and win. And it means it isn't just a one by one fight, because we're in a fight with a policy of scapegoating immigrants as a whole. And if we just were able to solve one thing and everyone would be able to get better food, great for the short term, but it wouldn't really change a thing, because you're waiting until the Home Office finds a new way to deny you your rights and to remove you, because they want numbers deported. They want numbers of removals, and it shows they're being tough on immigrants, and they can lie to British people that they're protecting British people from their competition, or they're protecting something about British culture, whatever their lie is, that nationalist rubbish that allows them to get away with or distract from the real overall crisis that isn't just a crisis for immigrants, it's a crisis for everyone, the economic mess that we're in.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah,
cool.
Definitely, Antonia. Thank you. Yeah, so right. Moslek, we're the last speaker. Moslek, go ahead. Tell us what's been going on at your end.
Hi there. Thank you, Ripon. Thank you for inviting us. Thank you, everyone, for coming on board. My name is Moslek, and we are from UK Ferry Connect. I founded UK Ferry Connect approximately officially 2016, but it's going on before that. One of the reasons UK Ferry Connect came on kind of started to grow was originally was due to the frustration of me not being able to employ people within the UK, skilled workers. Due to the hostile environment, they created a policy where we could not employ people from abroad, yet we could not find people. There was no people available within the UK for us to be able to employ. So what they did was, to employ somebody from outside the UK, we were not allowed to sell any takeaways within the restaurant sector. So any restaurant selling takeaways were not allowed a permission to get a sponsor license to be able to employ from abroad. Now, 2011, when one of my businesses, my chef left, I started advertising for chefs. I realized when I advertised, there was every 10 people that applied, 8 of them did not have documentation. So I looked in depth into that, and a lot of people, as you know, Alia and Antonia have said about people being, working cash in hand and whatever. A lot of these people have had a huge skill set that we actually desperately need. There are a lot of chefs out there that are unemployed. We can employ because of their document. We cannot employ, and we've been kind of victimized in a way because we cannot. We would be fined £20,000 if we employ any of these people. Now, between 2010 and 2016, they actually detained 16,873 people, of which 57% of them have been found working illegally within the hospitality sector. Now, when they say they're working illegally and these businesses are being fined £20,000 per person working in it, as a businessman, what I can say, and looking at some of the industry's situation, a lot of these businesses only employ those people because of desperation. Because they're desperate, they cannot find somebody with document who is a skilled and qualified chef. Now, Ali earlier on said about people, with all these extra expenses and everything else, is one of the reasons a lot of people who did have documentation, but because of, the goalposts being changed and moved and new immigration laws coming in constantly, a lot of these people have become, undocumented because they haven't reapplied or they haven't renewed their visas and whatever. I mean, so many reasons. Some of them are refugees who have managed to, work in some of these industries, especially the hospitality sector, and become skilled that we can actually employ. So one of the reasons UK Carry Connect started this campaign was to say, why not allow us to employ some of these people who are already here, have a skill set? Yes, we have a new immigration law saying that yes, now anybody and everybody can employ from abroad. They can employ now. The Europeans are not coming in. We've got Brexit. We can bring in talent from abroad and whatever. But do you know how much it costs a business to employ a person from outside at this present moment? You're talking of between £3,000 and £5,000 extra cost on top of having to pay when a basic salary of a chef is 18,700. We have to pay them 25,600 as in salary. So one of the things I'd love to work with, especially all the panelists here, is see if we can use some of the talent of refugees and undocumented migrants, especially the people who have been here, is to see if we can have them regularized on a discretionary leave, which is possible. I mean, it's within the rules as well of giving somebody discretionary leave that they can work and live a decent life within the UK. Thank you.
Thank you, Moslek. You were straight to the point, I must say. That's great to hear. So now let's open the floor for Q&As, or if there are any opinions that you feel you don't share or you do share, please do feel free to unmute yourself and have your say.
Just thank you to all the panelists. I had a comment because I was thinking about what Antonia Bright said, and she talked about the mechanisms of society and how it manifests in racism, or like racism. And I was thinking about the international humanitarian field. So I've been working there since end of 2009. And in all of that time, I've met one person who isn't white, who's in a leadership decision-making role in the international humanitarian sector. That is massive if you think about it. We have huge immigrant populations in the UK. Thank you, colonialism. But none of got language skills, got this amazing skill set. And in over a decade, I met one person who could make decisions. And also the other side of that, if you think about the populations that we are serving, Palestine has been going on forever. These conflicts, the average, person will spend about 7 years in a refugee camp if you end up in a refugee camp. They're not coming into leadership positions. It's the humanitarian world is very much a reflection of the country that I am from and that has raised me. And I think it's really interesting that if we think about practicalities of what we can do, is basically at the end of the day, we can make campaigns, I think, fantastic. But one of the things we have to do is also about being seen, being visible, and actually directly talking about those mechanisms. And I'm a bureaucrat by trade. I'm really good at sort of sitting behind a computer and figuring out the budget and writing about sanctions policy and the terrorism policy and making sure I've written the right policy. And one of the things I came to realize is, 10 years on, I'm now writing a book. If anyone's going to, it's going to be United Nonsense. It stopped because of COVID, but I'll get there. Talking about United Nonsense. And I think it's just important to be seen that we exist and that we have a voice and that we're actually doing amazing things. And in the international humanitarian world, it's invisible. Like, you don't see people who are, strong people, the labeled refugees, they disappear, So I think that's sort of a practical, we have to be seen.
Absolutely. Okay, sure. Okay, so Umar says we must be proactive and must be seen. And what do others say? I know Nassim, you got a question on the chat section. Do you wanna say it? Probably busy. Is there anyone else?
I can reply to Nassim's question from the chat, which is a really, really good question.
Go ahead.
Basically, how can undocumented people access the vaccine program without fear of being locked up or deported? And what steps have the government or organizations taken to save the lives of these extremely unlucky people? So we're doing a bit of work around the vaccine at the moment, because this is precisely the concerns that we have, is that people are, because of the hostile environment, are fearful of coming forward to get the vaccine, which is obviously it's not great. So the thing to note is that the way the vaccine rollout is currently happening is that you have to be registered with a GP, and then you'll get the call to get the vaccine through that registration. Lots of people are not registered with the GP for a number of reasons. Some of that is to do with the hostile environment and the fear. Some of that is also that people, for example, in initial accommodation or in home office accommodation, do not get registered with a GP, although they should, that the healthcare provision in those accommodations is outsourced to these private companies who, aren't able to give them the longer term healthcare that a proper GP practice might be able to do. What we do know is that the data sharing agreement that used to exist that gave the Home Office access to information from the GP surgeries is no longer in force. Oh, I don't know if my internet just died. Yeah, it's no longer in force, which means that although there is a risk that it is possible that that information could get shared, from what our understanding is, it is very unlikely that GP data is being shared with the Home Office. That process only really happens at secondary care level when people get these bills for their healthcare. So what we're recommending to people is that people do try and register with their GP practices, and there has been a massive push from the government. Doctors of the World was involved in this recently as well, to send to all GP practices this thing called the Safer Surgeries Toolkit, which reminds GP practices that you do not need to have immigration status to register, that GP services are free for everybody, that you do not need to have proof of address or ID to register, and that's gone to everyone is really important. And we're also, through the Patients Not Passports Network, working with local authorities and public health providers to ensure that people are able to register with that for free and without fear. What we think is going to happen also is that these mass vaccination centres that are being created, at some point in the future, there will be a way to essentially access them without registering with a GP, whether that's sort of through temporary registration with a GP or something. The thing that we don't know is then what's going to happen to the information that people provide when going to register with those to get the vaccine at those mass sites. So what we are saying to people is, please do register with a GP if you can. It should be safe, and if you have any problems, Doctors of the World are a great place to contact. If they refuse you, but it is a really important point, and we are working on it and trying to do a big mobilization to get the government to realize that actually to ultimately to get everyone to be able to engage with healthcare services, what that requires is that getting rid of the entirety of the hostile environment. Otherwise people are not going to come forward.
Thank you, Aliyah. Thank you. It's a great response, definitely. Wendy.
Hi everyone. I've been a legal aid lawyer for donkey's years. I'm semi-retired now, but I'm still doing loads of stuff, including doing a bit of work for Migrants Organised. So two things. One is I wanted to ask Antonio if she knew what was happening about the proposals that containers be placed in the Yarswood grounds to accommodate people as a holding centre. And the other was to answer the question that someone raised about rough sleepers, because over 65% of rough sleepers are migrants, and in 2019, not me personally, but people in the immigration world won a case declaring that it was unlawful to remove EU citizens just because they were rough sleeping. The government tried to criminalise it and remove them. So after a while, the government produced fairly weak guidance, but accepted that they couldn't remove them. But they also, we found out, secretly sent Home Office employees secret kind of guidance on how to get round the regulations that they'd published. But now in the Withdrawal Act, the possibility of criminalising EU citizens who were here before Brexit is back on the agenda, and I understand that's going to be subject to legal challenge again. But I would just say that Brexit has driven a massive hole and coach and horses through a lot of immigration aspects of immigration law, and people are really uncertain about what's happening because at the moment we're no longer signed up to Eurodac, which is the European fingerprinting system. So loads of people who've applied for asylum who the UK want to send back to Europe because they've transited through Europe, they're not able to do that because there's no agreement with those European countries to do it. And it just means people are going to be stuck in limbo, stuck in Napier, stuck in Yarlswood, stuck in wherever for years on end until that's sorted out. So that's another big issue and a big problem within the area of Brexit, COVID and migration.
Thank you, Wendy. Antonio, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just on the Yarlswood containers, I don't know exactly where that's at now, but one of the things that I noticed, there was a couple of places, because there was a place in Hampshire that they wanted to build a kind of new camp as well. And I always think it's important when you see a division amongst government, amongst politicians, like they're quite divided. I think this is a difficult policy for them, partly because, most importantly, the massive protests and actions, you know, just because you put people in the camps doesn't mean that you, you know, like dampen, you don't turn people into sheep, that they don't just do as they're told, you know, like they speak out, and they clearly have been, because it's all come into the newspapers regularly. And there was protests at Napier, at Penally, and at the Norfolk camp that someone was mentioning in the chat. And in Hampshire, there's protests. It's Caroline Noakes's constituency. I had no, like, she used to be immigration minister. I thought, you know, for her own reasons, she's against the camp being built in Hampshire. And then I guess for his own reasons, even the MP up in Norfolk was against Napier Barracks being used. There's a division politically between how to carry out immigration policy. And I think in that, we need to take action and fight for the direction we want things to go in, because we're not dealing with a united kind of a brick wall. We're dealing with a kind of a brick wall with a lot of cracks in it. We need to push it down. So I won't assume that they get away with what they want to do at Yarlswood. I think there needs to be, you know, what the actions and protests are an important factor to whether that can go ahead or how it goes ahead, and to keep fighting. And I had one thing just on the health. I'll be in danger of swearing if I try to put into words exactly how I feel about how useless the trade unions have been on fighting for immigrant rights. And I'm part of Unison, and it is a major union in healthcare, and it's not good enough. Because the thing is, like, you can have rights on paper, but it's not really the paper that is the one thing stopping people. You're going to have to face a nurse or a doctor who's going to make a decision about whether they, you know, if they want to, they can make it hard for you to get your, you know, like what was said. They can challenge you and ask you questions, even if on paper they're not supposed to. The fact that they're doing it means it's not a matter of the paranoia of people not seeking the vaccine or getting the healthcare. It's real. They face real racism in healthcare. You know, and if you anticipate it because of the experience that it's true, there is tons of racism and anti-immigrant, you know, targeting within healthcare, then of course people, even if the policies tell you you're allowed all these things, you're going to be at risk asking for them, because someone, if some, you know, racist decides that they want to kind of send your name to the Home Office, they can do it and they will not get into trouble. And I just am really, you know, that there needs to be massive campaigns that show that the people who do the healthcare, like coming from unions would be one way, that they are the antithesis of what the government has done to scapegoat immigrants, that they're against that, do you know what I mean? Then it would build that confidence, and it would actually give people the idea that it would be more real, that there was some safety in approaching healthcare and all the other kinds of public services for that matter.
Thank you, Antonio. Pierre has something to say. Go ahead.
You can hear me, yeah?
Yeah.
Just to amplify on a couple of things that have been said. On Yarl's Wood, I know that drainage is being dug in, which means that it's meant to ostensibly be for 3 months, but the fact that infrastructure and sewage systems, etc., are being expanded into the camp area suggests that they could be planning for much longer. And if you think about the camp in Norfolk, I understand has been open for more than 9 months. So these temporary measures have a tendency to evolve and become permanent. The other thing is to say on the homelessness side is that new immigration rules on the 1st of December that came into first force then effectively mean that people who are in breach of their leave or conditions by being homeless, so not claiming benefits, not working, but they may be breached of their conditions by being homeless. Those have come into force. So the environment that's going to happen for the unregularized EU national in the next few months, and certainly from June when the settlement scheme is meant to expire, they are going to face similar problems to what third country nationals will also are facing. Just as a further thing, I think I sort of want to give some cause from optimism. I mean, the situation is really bad, and Patel wants to reduce the time frame for sentences that lead to deportation to 6 months. Is one of the things she's thinking about. But the reality is that if you're going to campaign and if you're going to work on these issues, the worse they become, the more evidence that you have to show the inhumanity of everything. And the Jamaican flight that led to quite a lot of people being taken off, that serves as good evidence of the failure to provide meaningful legal advice at the outset. That and other similar charter flights that are going to happen will lead to more and more challenges. I think Antonia's right, the cracks are there between different people in authority. The understanding of how deportation harms children is, the fact that there's a Home Office policy that effectively means that you can be cruel to children, but not excessively cruel. That is, it's incredible that Parliament allowed that to go through, but that is something that when you tell people about it, they can't really believe that's true. So you have to direct them to the Home Office policy so that they can actually read it, and there it is in black and white. I think those sorts of stories and the reality of the harm that's caused to so many people and communities will be increasingly persuasive, because the cases are just becoming harsher and harsher and harsher. And I think that I'm seeing more and more organisations that are being organised. Movement Against Justice seem to me to be, becoming ever better with the work they're doing. Migrants Organised are really going forward. The 3 million are really going forward. Detention Action have been doing lots of tremendous work, and even our organisation, we're doing lots of stuff that's albeit in the rarefied world of the legal world, but we're taking actions that are also having differences, and I think we can make a difference albeit that, we're dealing with a populist government. But that's where it's also important that we work with opposition forces to try and get them to agree with us, to persuade them about our agenda for the moment when we're back at election time. That's what I want to say.
Fantastic, Pierre. Now there is a practical side. Obviously, we do want to look at it because I know we've covered a great deal about how difficult things are, how challenging things have been. But you guys are also expert when it comes to what has worked and what hasn't worked. So practically speaking, just to give a bit of twist over here, really. So things that has worked, campaign-wise, activity-wise, can you, I suppose, with a couple of few words individually, explain what sort of things could work, practically speaking, moving forward, either to campaign or either to take any form of action?
Yeah, you go.
Go ahead. Practical stuff. We need to be practical too. Obviously, I know there's so many depressing things, but give us things to do that would work.
Can I go, Rippon?
I think we've all. So sorry. Go ahead. I've spoken.
No,
please.
Yeah, go ahead, Pierre. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll be. We've got a particular angle. We've tried to combine different approaches, and I think a lot of organisations are doing similar things to us, which is engaging in correspondence with the Home Office and letters, and not simply to bring forward to gain support from other organisations or individuals, but actually to engage the Home Office in correspondence with a long-term strategy of eventual legal challenges, I think is really important. We ensure that whatever we say is evidenced, that we can have, we have it there and then. We don't say things because of political positions, unfortunately, maybe, but it's so that when we do say something, it's accepted and we're trusted for saying it. I think that's really important, particularly if you're planning for legal challenges. And we look at combining our casework, our day-to-day casework, with policy and research, and we combine that with an overview of strategic litigation. So we're looking at how we can take cases to the higher courts in order to establish precedents. Now that's a legal advice organisation, the way we're doing things. And so I think, we're one strand. Other organisations have a political agenda, which we all need in order for the arguments to be put in different ways as well.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Moslek. I agree. Absolutely.
What I was going to suggest is one of the things, I totally agree with Pierre as well. It's one of the things that we'd like to see done is be able to utilise some of these skills that we have in these migrants that are already here within the UK. If we can get support from everybody to be able to lobby the government to help these people, well, help us actually, because it's at the end of the day, it's saving our business more as important as helping these people with the skill set that we can actually keep. I know overall the government with amnesty and everything else, they've just built a brick wall that they don't even listen to what a lot of us have said or tried or done. And I think I'd love to see, working on at least taking some of the ones that will be able to give back to the community and the country as well, to be able to regularize their status.
Fantastic. Thank you, Moslek. Now, Nasrin, I think, sorry, is there any other hands? I can't see unless...
Can I have one practical thing quickly? I was just thinking about in the UK sanctions regime. So what it means at the moment, that a bank can close the account of a charity that's sending money to a region like Yemen, for example, because of fears around terrorism, and basically money is going into the wrong hands. And there's no liability So there's absolutely no liability. And this has happened to a number of Muslim charities, especially. They've just had their banks closed. Now, if you think about what that means, you could have a few 100,000 or 1,000. It's supposed to go out to a local project somewhere, and people need support in places like Yemen. And suddenly that money is in limbo, and you have no recourse to action. So I think one of the things is that trying to do is be a bit more public about. I don't think people are aware of what that means, because the other side of it for refugees and migrants, they send masses of money back to vulnerable communities. I mean, global remittances is worth something like 3 times the entire international humanitarian aid money that we as the world give. It's worth much, much more. And this is a lifeline for people. So I think it's also trying to raise awareness about this sanctions regime and what it means, and actually have some liability for the banks that they can literally just close you down overnight.
Fantastic. Any other practical steps that could be done? Thank you, by the way. More. Go ahead, Nazim.
Thank you. Such a great program, and thank you, Ripon, for hosting it, and thank you, many of the guests that arrived. I think one of the things that I myself has been unknown to, and I think we have to go back sometimes to basic education. I think within that education, we are missing those kind of learnings of the British Empire and where actually Britain arrived. One of the nation that has been conquered throughout the whole world. They're one of the biggest, contributor to every single war around the world, building, some of the best weapons businesses. And that's the kind of impact they're creating the refugees. And yet we rarely want to take responsibility of our actions. And I think a lot of them are missing in our education when we grow up. I recently spoke to someone who was completely shocked to even understand that Britain actually produces one of the greatest weapon of destructions across the world, and they sell them to those countries. And yet, when war happens, we prefer to stand back and just take the profit out of it. And I think our history, colonization from everywhere, needs to be taught in every level of education system. I think that will bring the public support that we need to move a lot of the legislation and the changes that we desire. That's just a personal opinion and thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Naseem. Aliyah, and then Antonia.
Thanks, Naseem. I'm so happy that I speak after you, because I couldn't agree more. And one of the things that we're doing at Migrants, I want to talk about 2 things really briefly. One of the things that we're doing at Migrants Organised is trying to build the movement for migrant justice, which includes what we've done is over a couple of years, in fact, actually before I started working on this, as my colleagues spoke with migrant communities, grassroots organizations, and many, many more, to build a common and shared vision and platform for the demands that we must make together, called the Fair Immigration Reform Movement Charter. And I'm going to put it in the chat now. And really it's about bringing together so many amazing pieces of work, the people on the panel here today and everyone watching in the comments, that there is so much going on campaigning to overhaul ultimately the incredibly racist and unjust system that currently exists, but also recognizing its its place in history, both with regards to imperialism and colonialism and that history, but also how we move forward together in a united way. And so that's the Fair Immigration Reform Movement, and you can sign it and watch the video, and I've put the links in the chat there. And also the other thing that I wanted to mention on the back of that is that we're running a series of webinars at the moment, including something that's very important about learning from our histories and the great traditions that we have struggling against racism, colonialism, imperialism, and the racism of British border controls. And so we're having an event in a couple of weeks about the struggle for migrant and racial justice in Britain, about histories next week. The other thing I wanted to touch on just very quickly again is the Patients Not Passports campaign, and drawing on something Antonia said about how what we need to do is have the people who are now tasked with being immigration enforcers as healthcare workers or as doctors, as teachers, whoever, of joining this campaign. That's what we do in the Patients Not Passports campaign. We work with organisations like Docs Not Cops, who are a group of doctors in healthcare who are fighting against hostile immigration and policies in healthcare and showing what is happening and what they are being asked to do in terms of excluding people and refusing them healthcare. And they, you know, hold protests and many other things. We work with them. But we're also organising with communities who have been affected, you know, by these policies. So, for example, in Sheffield, we met a guy called Simba. Simba, he's 30 years old. He's lived in the UK for 15 years. He was a basketball player 15 years ago, but he had a blood clotting condition, and he stopped going for his treatment because he was undocumented, and he started getting bills for the treatment. And so he stopped going because he couldn't pay, and he was scared that it was going to impact his visa application. But him not having the treatment resulted in him actually having a stroke. And one of the first things that happened when he woke up from, he was then in a coma, was that the finance team approached him and said, sorry, mate, you now have a bill for £100,000, which is an extortionate sum of money, particularly given that he has no right to work in this country, right? And he's also unable to work because of his condition. Yeah. Anyway, we work with Simba. Simba started this campaign, the Justice for Simba campaign, to raise awareness about what the hostile environment policies are doing, and work with people in his community to demand, you know, his own immigration status gets granted, but also that this doesn't happen to anybody else. And I'll post some links to that in the chat. But through the Patients Not Passports campaign, we have groups working in 15, I think 18 cities across the country to try and raise awareness about what's going on and to demand that locally these policies get overhauled and that doctors are no longer used as border control.
Any other contributions? Antonia, yes, sir?
Just on the actions, a couple, like one is, I think that there should be, with every voice possible, a demand to immediately shut down those camps that we talked about and detention. So I think, you know, no matter what walk of life people are coming from, you know, that needs to be said everywhere possible. You know, the other more general is, I think it's very important that we speak honestly and speak the truth about racism. And I think that it usually, the reason I think it's important is, I think it's something that it doesn't happen enough. It's like treating the question of racism like it's difficult or it's a problem. And usually it's put onto the working class as if the working class can't handle being honest about racism, when the truth is the working class is the most integrated class. It is the most integrated, you know, class. If we're saying that we cannot be honest about racism, then, you know, we're saying that we have to lie to people. I put it that way because I feel like it's almost a policy in certain places, like in labor or whatever. It's sometimes, you know, or in the unions, you can get treated like you've raised something taboo, you know, or you could, oh, we know, yes, but don't say it out loud. And it's treated like, you know, there's struggles, the most dynamic struggles that I can think of happening in Britain right now are happening around questions of struggling and fighting racism. And if we're going to move forward, it's going to be the most dynamic struggles that are going to take us forward. And we're kind of asked to hold back all the time instead, including by, you know, bureaucrats that are supposed to be on our side. So overcoming that and saying, do not ever feel like you have to apologize for calling it out, for calling out racism and confronting it, because it's necessary and it's the only way we're going to win real change or inspire people. Yeah, so that's more general, but there are lots of other practical things that we need to be doing. And with coronavirus, it's still hard sometimes to figure out how, because we can't demonstrate as we did before, but we will again. So we'll look out for that too. Yep,
go ahead, Pierre, you got your hand up again.
Just to also add on coronavirus, and BID has supported, our organisation, Bail for Immigration Detainees, has supported Migrants Organised letter that they've produced on this issue about vaccinations. And we're pushing also for all detainees and all deportees to be given vaccines, because if there's and really this should be extended to all prisoners, because to put people into crowded situations in detention centres and then to deny them vaccines because of their status is outrageous, and to deport them. And we know that from the Jamaican flight, that rumoured, albeit, that there was someone who had COVID-19, and who knows if they infected anyone else in Jamaica after landing. So it's, I think it's essential that we're pushing for this for people held in detention. We know that people in detention are not just passing through being deported on the next day. They're held for weeks and months. And in those circumstances, they should, as a matter of course, be vaccinated upon arrival in the centre.
I'll take 3 more questions or statements, then we're done. Go ahead. Looks like you make it quicker for me even. Any more? 3? Shall I say 2? Okay, so looks like not even 2. Shall I? Yeah, so 2, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, Rufun, can I especially ask the panelists if you can please get in touch? I've left my email address. I think there's a lot more. I would love to get involved and support you guys as well with what you're doing. Yeah, thank you very much. It was very nice. It was very nice meeting you all as well.
Great. So 1 more, and then I'll be pressing the button end. I think we've exhausted us, haven't we? So altogether, we've been running for over an hour and a half. I think that's probably more than enough. I just want to say thank you to all, and I shall be. I've recorded this anyway, so you'll get it on the website. I'm happy to send you a link to this and more. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can do so by BritBanglaCovid. And if you want to share anything to anyone, just let me know, and I can do it for you. And apart from that, I think we are nearly ready to go. So goodbye, everyone. And thank you for taking part on BritBanglaCovid.com.
Thanks, Rufun, for having me.
Take care. Bye.
Bye all.